Arab and Muslim leaders gathered in Saudi Arabia for an extraordinary joint Islamic-Arab summit in an attempt to exert its influence to press the United States and Israel to an end to hostilities in Gaza. Leaders, including the Iranian president, have strongly condemned Israel's bombardment of the enclave. And in the latest, the Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas, used the platform of the summit to address the world. Abbas called for attention on the intensifying humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip.
يتعرض شعبنا الفلسطيني لأبشع عدوان وحشي بل لحرب إبادة لا مثيل لها على يد آلة الحرب الإسرائيلية الجبانة التي انتهكت الحرمات والقانون الدولي الإنساني وتخطت كل الخطوط الحمراء في قطاع غزة بقتل وجرح أكثر من 40,000 من المدنيين الفلسطينيين غالبيتهم من الأطفال والنساء والشيوخ.
Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi called on Arab and Islamic world leaders to designate Israel's military a terrorist organization. In his first visit to Riyadh since Iran and Saudi Arabia agreed to restore ties in March, Raisi urged nations that have ties with Israel to sever them and called for greater support for Palestinians. Iranian President Ibrahim has called on for support from Islamic nations, saying that Gaza is not an arena of words but actions.
این میدان دیگه میدان سخن تنها نیست که فقط سخن و اعلام موضع بشه. باید میدان عمل باشه و اقدام.
Now, echoing what the Iranian president stated, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad also called for countries to stop normalization talks with Israel.
هي أن الكيان ازداد إيقاف أي مسار سياسي مع الكيان الصهيوني بكل ما يشمله المسار السياسي من عناوين اقتصادية أو غيرها، لتكون عودته مشروطة بالتزام الكيان بالوقف الفوري المديد لا المؤقت للإجرام بحق كل الفلسطينيين في كل فلسطين، مع السماح بإدخال المساعدات الفورية إلى غزة. أما الحديث عن الدولتين وإطلاق عملية السلام وغيرها من التفاصيل والحقوق.
Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman denounced attacks on Gaza. He reiterated his stance during the Riyadh summit, calling for an end to violence in Gaza.
الرحيم أصحاب الفخامة كامل، ومن هذا المنطلق يسرنا أن نعلن عن إطلاق مبادرة خادم الحرمين الشريفين وأن ندين ما يشهده قطاع غزة من اعتداء عسكري واستهداف المدنيين واستمرار انتهاكات سلطة الاحتلال الإسرائيلية للقانون الدولي الإنساني، لنؤكد ضرورة وقف هذه الحرب والتهجير القسري وتهيئة الظروف لعودة الاستقرار وتحقيق السلام في أفريقيا، وذلك عبر تدشين مشروعات وبرامج مائية في دول القارة بقيمة تتجاوز $1 مليار على مدى 10 سنوات.
The joint meeting has been convened in response to the exceptional circumstances taking place in Gaza. And earlier, two separate meetings were scheduled for the weekend, one of Arab League and one of the OIC members. But now it has been combined. And the Arab nations are divided between normalizing ties with Israel and condemning the humanitarian crisis which has unfolded in Gaza. As per reports, Arab foreign ministers who held an emergency meeting on Thursday were divided as some countries led by Algeria called to cut all diplomatic ties with Israel. Now, to get you more on this and on what the Arab-Muslim leaders meet means when it comes to de-escalation, we are being joined by Mr. Lester Munson, who is a senior fellow, National Security Institute, live from Washington, D.C. Welcome to the broadcast, Mr. Munson.
Thank you for having me.
I'd like to begin with the latest. The Arab leaders and Iran's president are in the Saudi capital for a summit that happened as part of the emergency meeting. And now this, as pressure for ceasefire in Gaza on Israel increases, what happens next?
Well, it's a very good question. I think we're likely to see these demonstrations around the world continue for the next few days. We're likely to see leaders in the region continue to publicly ask Israel and Washington to end the conflict. What I think we'll see on the ground is an intensification of Israeli efforts over the next few days, as I think they are on the verge of achieving most of their military goals in Gaza. It does appear that we're reaching the end game for the Israeli military action. So the question is really how much longer will that take? Is it 2 or 3 days? Is it 2 or 3 weeks? If it's 2 or 3 weeks, I think we're likely to see this political situation become much more difficult for Israel and Washington, frankly. So we'll see increasing pressure on those governments to end the conflict. Israel won't end the conflict until it has achieved its military goals. So there's likely to be some unpleasantness in the days ahead.
I also want to point out for our viewers and for you to further elaborate on this, that the Arab League and OIC were meant to originally meet separately. But the Saudi Foreign Ministry announced that the bloc summit would be combined now. Now, what message does this send out to the world, and especially Israel and Israel's biggest ally, the US?
Well, it's notable that Arab leaders are sitting down with the president of Iran. Of course, the big cleavage in the Middle East, aside from Israel and Palestine, is between Iran and the Arab nations. There is great skepticism in the Arab world about Iran's motivations here. The fact that they were willing to sit down together, that, let's be realistic, that does put increased pressure on Israel and Washington to end this thing quickly.
Sure, and you know, there were speculations early on in the initial days of the war that Hamas would use hostages as a bargaining chip, and Hamas did exactly that. But Prime Minister Netanyahu asked for unconditional release of hostages. Now, at this point, do we expect any developments on that front, as the fate of hostages still hangs in balance for over a month now?
Well, I certainly hope that there are some positive developments on the hostage front. But let's be very, very realistic here. Hamas put its headquarters under a hospital for a reason. It is willing to use human shields to achieve its military ends, including not just hostages from Israel, but also innocent Palestinians as human shields here. This strategy of hiding behind innocent babies, really, in these hospitals is now coming to a head in Gaza. And so Israeli officials, I think, are working very hard to get as many patients out of those hospitals as possible before the fighting really intensifies. The Hamas headquarters is buried deep beneath that hospital for a reason. This is Hamas's entire strategy. I don't really see them abandoning it anytime soon, unless they absolutely have to. So I have to say, I'm not very optimistic about progress on the hostage front.
Mr. Munson, as you rightly pointed out, now the fighting has only intensified since October 7th attack, and with the situation getting more dire as the humanitarian crisis in Gaza only gets deeper, and of course the fate of hostages also held captive by Hamas on October 7th still hangs in balance. But thank you for joining us and taking your time out, Mr. Munson. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you.